Joining me now to talk about this, I'm sure they were so surprised we were going to talk about this, our panel, Shelby Talcott, the White House correspondent for Semaphore, Ashley Etienne, the Meet the Press contributor and a former communications director for Vice President Kamala Harris, and Mark Bednar, the Republican strategist and former advisor to House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. So, Shelby, let's start with that, what we heard from the president. He went on to say once the war ends, the prices are going to drop. But given the fact that there's really no clear sign that the war is ending anytime soon, how much tolerance is the average voter going to have for this response?
Yeah, I think voters are having less and less tolerance for comments like this. And what I will say also is I think a lot of Republicans took this comment and sort of side heavily, right? This is not the answer that you want necessarily coming out of the president when Republicans are so focused on the midterms. But I think that this comment perfectly kind of encapsulates the struggle that some inside the White House have had with making sure that the president is focused on the midterms and focused on Republicans maintaining control while also giving him the room to focus on what he views as sort of his legacy building foreign policy efforts.
Ashley, how many of your fellow Democratic strategists have run to the edit room to start turning ads around this?
You took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, it's the perfect ad. And I believe the president that he's not focused on the economic suffering that the American people are focused on. He's too busy not just, creating this problem and his $1 billion ballroom and $30 million painting of the reflective pool. I mean, all of these things that have nothing to do and no relationship to the economic suffering that the American people are facing right now. What I find very interesting in the CNN poll that recently came out about this issue of the economy is that 77% of the American people are blaming Donald Trump's policies for their economic suffering. They're blaming Donald Trump's policies for the increased cost of living. So typically what Republicans will do, somehow they introduce the problem as it's Joe Biden or it's Barack Obama, it's someone else's fault, it's always someone else's fault. But the reality is the plurality of the American people across the political spectrum are blaming the president at this moment and blaming his policy. This is a crisis of his own making. And the concern is that he nor House Republicans have figured out how to get out of this.
So let's show that poll, Mark. President Trump's policies have increased the cost of living in your community. Do you agree with that? 70% of Americans agree with that across the board. 90% of Democrats, 81% of independents, and 55% of Republicans. If I know you care most about Congress, this is your expertise. How nervous are House Republicans in particular worried about this impact that voters seem to think the war is having on them?
Well, it's very clear that the most salient of all prices, it's not healthcare, it's not higher education, it's gas prices. And if there's anyone who understands the power of the visibility of salient symbols, of economic symbols, that's President Trump. And so he, of course, is very aware where gas prices are going. And that underscores the need for this war to end on a positive note with a W that he declares as soon as possible. Of course, this requires, delivering both in Iran and then also how this gets swept into the negotiations with China. They are the world's largest importer of oil. So what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, that impacts them directly too. So these are all tied together. But to your point, the fact that these prices are where they are, they need to come down.
But are you concerned that you're running out of time? Like, if they open the Strait of Hormuz tomorrow, is that soon enough to get those prices down to a level where a House Republican can feel comfortable they can win re-election?
Well, energy markets require certainty, and they require a runway for planning. So if in fact they do have that certainty, and if they get that opportunity to say, look, the strait is back open, we know how we can hit our benchmark for production, that's an important step to go. And the fact that the generic ballot has actually been cut in half since the last time CNN conducted this poll, it's still a jump ball, even with gas prices where they are. So if they go down and there's a runway for these gas prices to go down, that's only a good sign for House Republicans.
Can I just say that we cannot, Republicans would be foolish to think that their stakes are going to change if gas prices go down. The reality is that 70+% of Republicans believe that inflation is too high. So there are a lot of metrics that are involved in whether or not people
gas prices
have
being
confidence.
a big part of that.
Yeah, but also cost of of groceries. I mean, these things have persisted over time where you can't blame Biden. And so the reality is the difference between any crises like a foreign policy issue is that people live every day this economic crisis. So even if gas prices were to go down, you still got a plurality of Republicans that think that inflation is way too high.
Okay, let's talk now more about the midterms in a different way, Shelby. The president was asked today about whether or not he would send ICE or National Guard to the polls. I want you to listen to his response.
Would you send the National Guard or ICE to voting locations in November? Would you do that?
Well, you know what? I'd do anything necessary to make sure we have honest elections. We have to have honest elections.
So you're not.
Give us a reality check here. Is the White House really considering this? Is this something that could happen?
You know, the White House will tell you on the record, on background, off the record, that when the president proposes something, ultimately he is oftentimes the decider, and they sort of follow his lead. So when the president says something like this, if he continues to bring it up in meetings privately, it is certainly going to be something that's on the table. And case in point, I think whenever the president talks about the 2020 election, when I was on the campaign trail covering him, there was a point in time where a lot of people on his team and a lot of Republicans who wanted him to win were kind of tired of that talk. They were telling him, move on, we've got to move past this. But as he has become sort of maintained his focus on that, you have seen how his allies have just sort of accepted it. And I think in a lot of ways, when the president proposes things, if he continues to push them, it becomes a reality.
Mark, what could CBP, ICE, or the National Guard, what would they do to protect the integrity of the election?
Well, there's broader questions to that too. Does that actually repel Republican voters in Republican districts? You know, like the actual electoral ramifications of that, you know, are unclear. Of course, President Trump wants and, you know, has advocated for secure elections for a long time. What is an actual ICE person going to do standing there on the ground? You know, I think that would require some further explanation, but obviously election integrity is important to him. Let's see where this actually ends up going.
So how does this impact Democrats, Ashley? Last month, Senator Schumer announced that the Democrats are going to have a task force to try and protect elections. What does that mean in terms of the interaction with the president? And what did Democrats do in response to something like this?
Can I just say this notion that the president's into the integrity of the election is kind of laughable? I mean, this is the same guy who called down to Georgia and asked for them to fine him 11,000 votes. I mean, that's completely ludicrous that the president is into secure elections. But nevertheless, I mean, I think that, you know, Democrats would be smart, and I think they're preparing for this based on what you said from Leader Schumer, preparing for any level of shenanigans. I mean, you know, what goes on the ground in terms of elections is rarely covered on national news. I mean, we've seen all different types of shenanigans. I've done 4 presidentials at this point. So they're preparing for anything to happen, from the National Guard to them, you know, what we saw in Texas most recently during the primary, where they told people to go to the wrong polling location, all different types of things. So the Democrats are sort of mounting a big effort, not just from a legal perspective. They're trying to recruit a record number of lawyers to be on the ground in some of these states. They're going to do a lot of education ahead of the election to let people know, don't be intimidated by ICE or DHS, et cetera, et cetera. So I think they're preparing for all levels of shenanigans.
Okay, all right, we're going to have to leave it there. Shelby, Mark, Ashley, thank you all for being here.